Hi everyone, this is lecture for module number 7 about social interaction in everyday life in the age of the internet, and it accompanies the reading by the chapter 5 from Introduction to Sociology, pages 107 to 131. Okay, let's start. So in this chapter we will talk about this issue of impression management and how we use impression management techniques in everyday life. We will also cover and try to understand how social interaction and broader features of society are closely related. And we should think about how face-to-face interactions remain so important in this age of the internet. Alright, so some of the basic concepts include this issue of civil inattention. It's this process through which individuals in the same physical setting demonstrate to each other that they're aware of each other's presence, but avoid any behavior that might be seen as too intrusive. In other words, we can think about this as acknowledgement of strangers in our environment. If you think about it, we do it every day and we do it multiple times during the day. For example, when you're at your college, walking through hallways, you might look people in the eye, but then avert, you might briefly just look at them and then avoid their eyesight. Or on the subways where people come in, we look at them briefly and then we go back to doing whatever we do, so as not to invite any kind of behavior that we wouldn't be comfortable with. So that's civil inattention. Civil inattention is a part of or falls into this field of microsociology, and maybe you remember microsociology is a study of individual and group social interaction. The father of this field is Erving Goffman, who's a very famous sociologist, and he argues that studying social interaction, even such tiny things as civil inattention, is important for three reasons. One is it tells us a lot about structure. So what he means by that is that we do things in society in patterns. If you remember, social structure refers to patterns and relationship patterns and regularities in human behavior. So for example, majority of us go to school. Then when we finish school, we might go to college or we might start work, and then we start our families. And the structure kind of repeats because when we have our kids, they go through similar structures. So he argues that by looking at these day-to-day interactions, they can tell us a lot about how we organize our lives, what is important to us, what we pay attention to, and so on. However, he argues the second reason is kind of the flip side of the first one. So not only does microsociology tell us a lot about structure, it also tells us about human creativity. And think about this, no one day is exactly like the day before. If you go to school through Monday to Friday, even though you might have similar classes week to week, what happens in those classes changes. The kind of interactions you have with other people changes. Or think about weekends. We don't do stereotypical standardized things on the weekends. Those are times where we're more free, for example, for those of us who, let's say, don't work over the weekend. So not only can microsociology tell us a lot about structure, it can also tell us a lot about human creativity. Finally, Erving Goffman argues that micro-level interactions can tell us a lot about large social processes and institutions. Think about interacting on the job interview. We often show more respect to people who are interviewing us. We show up being dressed appropriately and so on. So we show that this is a person who has some kind of a power in our society, somebody we look up to. So even those tiniest of conversations can show us a lot about larger issues in societies. Who has power, who has more rights to certain things. There's some issues that even those tiny interactions can tell us about. So again, he argues that social interaction can tell us about structure, about human creativity, and can also shed a light on these large social processes and institutions. Of course, we communicate with more than just words, right? We communicate through faces, gestures, and emotions. Smile is a way of communication. Throwing your fists in the air is a way of communication. So this is called nonverbal communication because we communicate, we exchange meaning through things that aren't words, through facial expressions, gestures, and emotions. However, we have to remember that while all of us can smile and all of us can throw our fists in the air, what it means differs from culture to culture. So, for example, middle finger in the US might mean something else than middle finger somewhere else, right? Or although I'm not really sure about the middle finger, but I'll tell you about the thumbs up. Thumbs up in the US means good job, great, good work. And some cultures it actually means the middle finger. So you can see how that might lead to some kind of trouble. The other thing is, nonverbal communication is seriously limited in the context of email and electronic communication. Think about it, we can't see the person, so we are missing all this, right? We're missing these tiny little subtle things that can tell us so much. For example, I'm sure you sometimes got a message that's all capital letters. It might make you think that somebody's yelling at you, but it might just be a mistake and they never meant to, so to say, yell at you. So we're losing some kind of meaning or understanding. However, humans are also very creative, right? Like we talked about. So what we came up with, all those emoticons, right? We have a smiley ones, we have a tear, one tear, many tears, so that we have a picture, so to say, for every emotion out there. All right. A very famous playwright once said that the world can be seen as a stage. The world is a stage, and that was often given to credit for that sentence was given to Shakespeare. So impression management, if we think about the world as a stage, that means we're all actors. And impression management means preparation for the presentation of one's social role or striking a particular pose. So roles, just to review, are socially defined expectations that person in a given social position follows. We can talk about student being a role, mother, teacher, and so on. So when we engage in impression management, we prepare ourselves for this presentation of the social role. So as a teacher, before I come to class, I often prepare my notes and so on. Students often do the readings, right, before they show up in class and so on, to show that we are comfortable and good at performing our roles. With each social role, there is also a social status or prestige associated with it. Meaning that there's honor associated with these roles. If you think about it, social roles that often get a lot of status are those that require often a lot of education. So professors might get a high status job, or for example, president and so on. But just because a job is high in status, I want to make sure you understand this, doesn't mean that it always comes with a lot of money. Some low status jobs, such as sanitation workers, might not be seen as, wow, fantastic, awesome jobs, but they're actually paid very well. So money and status don't always go in hand in hand. Of course, sometimes they very much do so. Okay, let's continue. We can also talk about two types of interactions, focused interactions and unfocused. If you think about focused interaction, you can think about interaction between two friends, right? When one is saying something, the other one is paying attention and then asking a question about what the other person was saying. This is when we're really paying attention to what the other person is saying. In classrooms, we often hope, at least, that we have focused interactions so that students and professors are paying attention to what the other ones are saying, right? Unfocused interaction is kind of like a step above civil inattention. So if you remember, in civil inattention, we look at people and then we kind of avoid their eyesight anymore. If you think about unfocused interaction, think about interaction where you see somebody in school and you wave, you say hello, and then you go on your way, right? Or interactions at the large parties when you're kind of doing small talk but not really paying attention to what the other person is saying. So that's the difference. In focused interactions, we are really paying attention to what is happening, and unfocused, we're kind of paying attention but not really. We're kind of looking elsewhere at what else is happening. With this idea that the world is a stage, we can also see that some people are audience, right? Some people are paying attention to what we're doing. We also segregate audiences, meaning that depending on what role we perform, other people, different people are watching us. So at home, when we're being, kids to our parents are watching us. At work, our employers are watching us. And we can divide our world into these two stages. Front region is where we perform our formal social roles. So when you guys log on to Blackboard, you are formally students, right? I am a teacher. This is also happens when we go to our job. We become up front, we are performing our formal social roles. In back regions, this is where we relax and prepare for the presentation of the formal role. So this is when we're at home, hanging out with our friends, being relaxed and just being ourselves, so to say. If you think about this impression management in the era of internet, I'm going to leave you guys with this. Do you think back and front regions, exist on the internet? Because if you think about it, is our Facebook page, my, let's say, private Facebook page, my front or my backside? Think about this. I'll leave this up for you guys to decide. Another thing we should talk about is interaction vandalism, meaning breaking rules of conversation. For example, catcalling is an example of interaction vandalism. When people are not responding to what we are saying, or you're having a conversation with somebody and they just abruptly leave, that's breaking rules of conversation. If you think about it, all conversations have rules. And lastly, we have this issue of time and space dimension of social interactions. If you think about it, all our interactions take place in specific clock time, right? At a specific time. So when you have like these mortal, these classrooms that you go to, let's say Mondays through Wednesdays, you have the same kind of, you have interactions from 11 to noon in your classroom. So all our interactions take place in specific clock time. Regionalization is this idea that depending on what region of our lives we find ourselves in, we have different conversations. So think about the regions, like you have your social life, you have your work life, and so on. Depending on what region you find yourself in, you will have a different conversation. And finally, this issue of compulsion of proximity. So compulsion means the need for, proximity is closeness. So sociologists worry that with all this interaction that we have, that we're doing through devices, we are actually pulling ourselves further away from our normal human contact. Do you think that's true? Do you think there will ever be a time when we won't need another human being because we'll be able to communicate through just these devices? This is what my question for the discussion is for this week. So this is it for this module 7. Okay, I'll talk to you guys soon.